Everyone. Hope everyone is doing well this evening. This is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour, which is a critical look at a weekly update, critical look at Canada's role around the world. I'm Eve Engler, coming to you from Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. And Unfortunately, there's lots to deal with because there's some obviously insane Israeli war that they've unleashed on top of all their other violence that we'll get to towards the end or at the end. Um, so I'll get right to it. Again, hope everyone is doing well. It's very nice weather here. It's very warm. Um, so this week I just saw a story saying that Barrick Gold's operations in Mali have been basically taken over because their dispute with the International Center for Settlements of Investment Disputes has begun. Um, so that conflict between the Malian government and Barrick continues, and it's now going to be formally adjudicated. In Chile, Mining Watch's report, I think it was Mining Watch, might have been Rights Action. Supreme Court overturned a ruling in favor of Canadian company Alclara Resources, uh, rejecting its bid to silence critics of its rare earth project. So pretty much every week there's some story about some Canadian mining company in some sort of conflict and some sort of dispute around the world. Uh, there's a story that I got an action alert of a South African union leader, former COSATU, I think leader even, Jay Nadol, who's been blocked from entering Canada, even though he's like been here many times. His partner lives here, so he's being basically denied because of his like terrorism claims from 30, 40 years ago during the apartheid, the white rule in South Africa. So apparently, it's a little bit unclear, but apparently there's that stuff still floating around out there where there's South Africans who were involved in challenging the apartheid regime that are still kind of having their in this case someone prominent. I think he's retired now, but still having their entry into Canada undermined by claims that they were involved in criminal anti-government activities from decades ago. There's a story about some I guess sort of gang members that are apparently close or connected in some way to the Indian government who had basically been following and had all kinds of info on Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, and it's sort of presented as there was some plan to maybe assassinate him. And there's a lot of criticism of that this week. I have to say, on a personal level, I did kind of witness this because all of a sudden Singh had this huge RCMP detail with him, and it's probably a year ago. I don't know when it was. I tried to challenge him on some public event, and it was just like police out of control. I posted it to my ex account, and that was kind of a sudden thing. So there was this, and I was told that there was some like threats on his life. I guess it was apparently a bit more serious than understood. And there's a lot of people criticizing in Calgary with the G7 summit. There was a protest from the Sikh community around Modi being invited to the G7 summit. There was a whole campaign. The Globe Mail this week had multiple stories, had a editorial all about Jimmy Lai, the Hong Kong, uh, I think he's a billionaire, apparel mogul that's also a media company about giving him honorary Canadian citizenship, and there was a resolution that Judy Scrow, who's the one that's really close to the MEK, the kind of cult-like anti-Iranian group, she had a resolution that was trying to get a unanimous resolution in the House of Commons around this question. And apparently, somebody from the Liberal Party, she's a Liberal MP, but the Liberal, I don't know if it's the whip or the government leader or whatever they call it, but stepped in and got her to uh, hold back on her resolution. Unanimous consent resolution on this. And so the Globe then did a story about it. So there's a big kerfuffle about this in the context of the G7. And the Erwin Kotler's group is right in the middle of this, is the one, the Raoul Wallenberg Center is the one pushing this thing. He's got a much more dubious track record than is put into that appears when they describe him. They describe him as just a democracy advocate, but he was working with, he was calling for sanctions on Hong Kong or on China maybe, and with U.S. officials. He was hobnobbing with, I think, Pompeo and stuff when he was calling it. So he's the idea that it's just sort of, it's a pretty politicized kind of direction. Now, whether he should be in jail, that's a whole different question. I don't know that pans out, but this framing him as this I don't know, sort of this democracy advocate that doesn't have a pretty significant kind of right-wing alignment with U.S. empire, calling for sanctions on China, on Hong Kong. That's not the case. And of course, this is all part of this demonized China business that's part of a broader political project. Now, in the counter direction to that, there's a number of stories and comments in the business pages about how Bill Morneau, the former finance minister, liberal finance minister, urges stronger ties with China. There's a story in the Globe business section. Beijing envoy urges Canada to drop tariffs on China's electric vehicles. And then the Financial Post, can Canada repair its ties with China? So there's clearly serious discussion going on in the corporate world. Most of this appears in the business pages about the fact that this is the market. If it's more difficult with the U.S., China is the obvious alternative. But then, of course, there's this bigger geopolitical game going on, and China is very much seen as the enemy in that. And in that context, we had a week ago, last Monday, Carney announced this huge increase in military spending, which I talked about a bit last week. It's hitting the 2% by this year, or I think it's March of next year, and what it meant concretely is a $9 billion increase in military spending on top of the increases that were already budgeted for this year. And then there's a bit of accounting games that go on that gets Canada's quote unquote defense spending up to $61 or $62 billion, which works out to 2% of the 3.1 trillion or so GDP. And one of the things that Carney mentions in the justification, he talks about these acute threats, immediate and acute threats, and China is one of those immediate and acute threats, and Russia, of course, is the other. All the people who've been displaced, tens of thousands displaced from their homes, from forest fires that are partly induced by climate change. They're not facing an immediate and acute threat. It's this China, Russia, and it's totally ludicrous to think that China and Russia are in any position to invade Canada. Canada, of course, has troops on Russia's border in Latvia. Canada has naval vessels patrolling in the South China Sea, spy planes. China doesn't have that the other way around. Canada does that next to China, territorial waters, airspace, but none of that happens the other way around. So So that's, the notion of China or India being acute immediate threat is just nonsense. Obviously, we know, as we've talked about many times, the only country that could possibly invade Canada is the US. But that's what Carney is putting forward in calling for in not calling for, in announcing a huge, massive increase in military spending. And the rhetoric that in Carney's speech had a whole bunch of also of anti-US rhetoric. So while he's giving this huge increase to the military that is feeding exactly what Trump wants, as the Wall Street Journal made it very clear in their article about Canada's boost in military spending, that Trump's been pressuring he puts forward this anti-US rhetoric. It's just a cover, a way to mask the fact that they are doing what Trump wants. This was a big win. Let's give Donald Trump credit. He got a big win out of Carney with regards to the increase in military spending, this quick, immediate increase in military spending. And he's having some wins on that front with a number of other NATO countries as well. And now they're planning on pushing that up to the 5% of GDP at the upcoming summit. So potentially Trump could get another even bigger win. So this is the guy who we're supposed to be elbows up to be hostile to. We are giving Donald Trump wins, or Carney is giving Donald Trump a number of wins. He's talking now about joining the Golden Dome. That seems there's CBC says that's part of an agreement that's being kind of a tariff agreement arrangement, tariff reductions in exchange for Canada joining the Golden Dome, which would be another win for Donald Trump if that does come to pass. Now, in his speech a week ago about the big increase in military spending, Carney again he does this anti-US. We're giving 75% of our capital spending on defense equipment goes to the US. Well, the Wall Street Journal story on this tells us that the do I have the exact? I don't know if I got the paragraph. Canadian officials have been making the pitch to US negotiators that Canada will be in a position to make big deals with US defense contractors, the People said. So Carney is saying, 75% of our money, defense money, is going to the US companies, and saying we've got to change that. And then simultaneously, quietly announcing to US negotiators, or, in the negotiations around tariffs and the like, that, with this boost in military spending, there's going to be a bunch of money to purchase US equipment. Again, so he's doing this, he knows the Canadian public wants a certain degree of criticism. He knows there's discomfort with Trump and the US. So he gives that rhetorical play, but then, quietly continues on with supporting the US empire. And we're seeing that looks like this is going to play out even with the F-35 that he called for the review on. 16 of these 88 have been purchased. It'd be difficult to get out of that, though I think we could even get out of that. But they're saying there would be a penalty to get out of that. And so supposedly the rest of them are up for review. But then you have the fact that it's the DND doing the review. It's all in-house. We know the military wants these F-35s. And then Defense Minister McGuinty said, I've just come back from the NATO meeting where I believe 30 of the 32 NATO partners are participating in the F-35 program. It's a fifth-generation fighter jet at a time when the world is looking for fifth-generation fighter jet capacity right across NATO. So they're already laying the groundwork to, back away from their F-35 pause. While there was this sort of political energy momentum of anti-US, anti-Trump, Carney announced, in the lead up to the election, Carney announces a pause, a review on the F-35, and then once after the election, once some of that energy subsides, it looks like they're setting up to go right back to continue along with that plan. So it's a pretty the rhetoric was always, we knew it was always very thin. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to do a good enough job in pushing on this harder. So I published a piece this morning about this in the Calgary Herald that I saw when I was in Calgary for the G7 summit, counter summit, on I think it was on the Thursday or Friday paper. Chrétien was there for some G7 summit at the University of Calgary, and he tells us stuff. He talks about Russia, and and um, and he talks about how we should be talking with Russia, shouldn't be on our high horse. And then he also includes that the basically saying that the reason the war happened is because of NATO expansion. It's not totally crystal clear. You're just getting the tidbits that the journalist is taking from his speech, but that's very much what is conveyed in the article. And Chrétien says he had an hour and a half long conversation with Putin about NATO expansion and I guess how much that concerned him. And the piece I published today is talks about that, and then contrasts it in this Calgary Herald article. You have Charlie Angus, the former NDP MP, who's sort of supposedly leading the resistance to Trump, and he's quoted in this article saying that basically the Putin puppet Donald Trump is attending the G7 summit, and sort of implying that Canada maybe shouldn't have invited Donald Trump to the G7 summit. But the criticism, at least in this article, the only criticism that Charlie Angus is putting forward, obviously he has many others, but what he's forefronting is this criticism that Trump has sought out peace negotiations and détente with Russia. And so, there's a lot of really valid criticisms of Donald Trump. In my mind, that's one area where, Donald Trump's actually done something, you know, preferable to the alternative, whether it's, exactly right or it's the perfect or all that kind of stuff. We can have a different, discussion on that. But the broad outlines of, having discussions with Russia, as Chrétien says, and then also having and trying to, put some end to this war. Those broad outlines are the right way to go. But this is what's being criticized by the NDP Angus. Now, this brings up a bunch of points, though, because part of why the NDP hasn't been able to respond forcefully to what's going to be a huge attack on our social programs. That's setting up. There's no scenario where the social programs are not going to face a huge attack because of the military spending increase. And certainly that will be the case if we go anywhere in the vicinity of this 5% of GDP that the NATO looks like they're pushing here. And the fact that the NDP can't come out and say, if Canada agrees to 5% of GDP as is being talked about, then we are going to call for Canada to withdraw NATO, or you can formulate it in a slightly softer way than that, but to start at least raising the notion that if NATO is going to keep increasing, forcing an increase in military spending at the expense of other social programs, then there has to be some threshold at which you're going to say, okay, we'll get out of NATO. I mean, is it 10%? Is it 7%? Is it 5? Is it 20? Like, there's got to be some threshold, obviously. I would say, it should have been at 2%. I would say even without the 2% target of NATO, NDP should be calling for Canada out of NATO. But there has to be some threshold. That has to be a plausible position for the NDP to take. But the problem for the NDP is that they are so gung-ho on the NATO proxy war, and you have like their criticism of Donald Trump is not the whole host of things that he's done that are odious. It's they're forefronting the criticism being that he's talking to Putin and he's Putin's puppet. That makes it very difficult for the NDP to get out of that box of the pro-NATO box. And the whole notion of NATO commitments, and Don Davies, NDP interim leader, used that term when responding to the Carney's 2% of GDP announcement last Monday. I think he had a press conference on Wednesday, and he used that term, NATO commitments. And so if you're in the NATO headspace, it's very difficult to to push back on this increasingly clear threat to Canadian well-being by by boosting military spending, which is going to come with serious attacks against social services. And they talk about one Globe story, business sector story says that the 9 billion, this increment is more than half the value of the Canada's social transfer to the provinces to support education and social assistance. It is more than the federal government spends on research and development. So that's just the boost. That's just the $9 billion boost, let alone the whole 45 billion on top of that of military spending, and then the other defense spending, that's another 10 billion or so in sort of creative accounting. So this is a real issue. This is a huge, and the NDP is boxed in. Now, in the article, I quote this thing from Chrétien, where in his bio, My Years as Prime Minister, I think it's called, a book, I think came on 2007, 2008, 2010, I don't forget what year exactly. And he's got this passage in it, and it's just basically how he was always under pressure to increase military spending. The U.S. was calling for more more money on the military to support NORAD and NATO. The arms companies, the think tanks that funded by them, they're always calling, and there was always more, more, more. And so it has always been the case. The militarists always want more. Obviously, that's not very complicated, but that's, I think, something that NDP and others need to keep in mind in this context. And so the point of my article was basically Jean Chrétien is much more reasonable on Russia, on NATO than Charlie Angus is. And I have to also say that Chrétien is actually the leader who begins Canada's big push to expand NATO eastward with Poland, and he's criticizing the Americans for not being on board enough to push forward NATO expansion. So it's not like he wasn't a pro NATO person. Now, another thing I wanted to mention on this kind of front that I find totally fascinating is a series of stories in the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere. This one that was titled "Ukraine drone attack points to U.S. vulnerability." And so basically the point that they're saying that the success of the Ukrainian drones and knocking out a bunch of the Russian bomber aircraft, that's real, now that is a danger for the US. Now the US needs to spend a bunch more on military to protect from this possible scenario happening in the US. And this is a beautiful sort of cycle, right? Just like the NATO expansion cycle is a beautiful cycle for militarists. We push to expand NATO eastward. That leads to a reaction. Our reaction to that invasion is to increase military spending, and it's all great for the militarist, the military industrial complex. It's a beautiful cycle from their perspective. Well, this is another example of that, just a further example of that. So the US, obviously the Ukrainian intelligence service was reestablished. New York Times reported on this after the coup in 2014. And basically the Americans rebuilt, created, if you want to call it, the Ukrainian intelligence agency that is apparently behind this drone attack that was a big success in Russia. Probably the US was directly involved, but even if they weren't directly involved, they clearly were involved in the general sense of their substantive relations with the Ukrainian that did it. Well, now this, sort of in some sense, US sponsored or US enabled drone attack is now being used to justify, in this Wall Street Journal op-ed, and I saw a couple of stories going in this direction the last couple of weeks, but this is some arms company official writing this op-ed. Now they're then using that to justify more military spending because now the U.S. is potentially under threat by this similar dynamic of this happening. And it really is the virtuous cycle from the military industrial complex's standpoint. On Palestine this week, you have a bunch of developments. One, Canada did sanctioned these couple right-wing, the extremist ministers. I don't think it amounts to much. Better to happen than not happen. They did it with the British and a handful of other countries. the in announcing that though, this is just totally remarkable. In announcing it, Anita Anand says Canada remains unwavering in its support of Israel. Right? So 20 months into this Holocaust in Gaza, our foreign minister is still announcing that we're unwavering in support of. I don't know that, like, do they say, have you ever heard them say we're unwavering in our support for Mexico? We're unwavering in our support for the US. We're unwavering in our support for Britain. We're unwavering in our support for UK. We're unwavering in our support. Like, where else is there any other country that gets unwavering? So even while you're doing something positive, not that positive, but a small positive step, they still have to do this rhetorical dance of the unwavering support for Israel. It's just quite remarkable. Um, the There's a good piece in the Canadian Dimension. Lipman, she has the piece called "Where Are Canada's Pro-Palestine Rabbis?" And she points out that the U.S. it was like 350 rabbis in the U.S. signed a statement that was critical. I think it was a ceasefire statement. It was not an anti-Zionist statement, but it was in the positive direction. And is basically she's saying there's not a single rabbi in Canada that's practicing. Obviously, I have like Rabbi Mivaser, but he's no longer, he's retired. I think there's a couple others that are active and they're pushing back against the genocide and I think she says there's some online other Canadian rabbi that I guess some sort of online congregation. Um, but there this week, I think tomorrow, the Jewish Community Center here in Montreal, the community center is launching their inaugural speakers series with Gad Saad. Gad Saad, I think that's, yeah, the totally racist, openly racist business professor at Concordia. He's a big fan of Elon Musk and Trump and Tommy Robertson, the right wing activist in the UK there, and very openly anti-Muslim and Arab. So that's who they're bringing into. This is a community center. It's not even ostensibly a political organization. So they're bringing him in. They launched their speakers series, which gives a bit of a taste of the where things are at with the establishment Jewish organizations. There's a couple of interesting stories. The CJPME did a study, and they found that the National Post rewrote nearly 200 wire stories by the Canadian press to make them more pro-Israel. So the Canadian press is not exactly challenged the establishment media outlet. It's totally within, it's all, I mean, it was set up with government funding as a way to promote World War I, but we'll leave that aside. But it's not, challenging the establishment, but yet it's not anti-Palestinian enough for the National Post. So they rewrite the wire copy to add in words to make it more anti-Palestinian. Just the National Post over the past 20 months, honestly, it's just remarkable how wildly rabid they are. There was a Globe story. So this week, Canada voted for a resolution calling for aid into Gaza, or end the blockade of Israel blocking all the food from entering and stuff. And it was passed by almost all the vast majority of the world. The headline was Canada's UN vote on Israel criticized as departure from past position. Criticized as departure from past position. So this was the framing. The headline very much took not that Canada did what was right, not that Canada joined the rest of the world. It was that, well, this was a shift from our previous isolated against the world in anti-Palestinian position. And the story is just so I would say a very sophisticated form of not the National Post form of anti-Palestinianism, a bit more sophisticated, Stephen Chase, Globe and Mail form. It starts with CIJA as CIJA gets the whole start of the article is CIJA and the like. Now, what's partly interesting about this story is that the NDP does something in this story that I think may be the first that I've seen. Is that at the end of the story, they says, asked about the criticism of the Canadian government from CIJA, Miss McPherson, Heather McPherson, NDP foreign critic, said the group, quote, seems very out of touch on some things. There are children that are dying right now of hunger. So here you have the NDP foreign critic criticizing CIJA. I don't know if I've ever seen that. From the passage in the Globe, she's very careful. There are some things, that they seem out of touch on some things. So not presumably here that implicit in there is not on the whole like anti-Semitism, outrage they do about domestic issues, not on, whatever other issue but on some things. So she's now willing to get to the point of criticizing CIJA publicly on their position. That's an advance. That's a step forward. And I guess Stephen Chase deserves a little bit of credit for burying that it's the end, the final paragraph of the article. So that's a good development. There was a Globe piece about the Holocaust monument in Ottawa being defaced with "feed me." It's a little unclear what the person meant by saying that. It's not clear if they're referring to the starvation campaign in Gaza or just randomly putting "feed me" on the Holocaust monument. It's not clear. But this is what happened about 9 days ago. And it was on the Monday or the Tuesday Globe, but I didn't read it until after last week's show. The spokesperson for the Ottawa Holocaust Monument, Greenspoon is the guy's name. He uses this opportunity. This is somebody representing a Holocaust monument. He uses this opportunity to say, quote, Greenspoon also said Canada and other countries should no longer contribute money to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees. They quote him saying, they need to stop blaming Israel for the food and water and medical aid that is much needed, but is not getting through to the Gazans because of Hamas, and that's been the case for years. So a representative of a federally funded Holocaust museum is using the defacement of the monument to say we have to starve Palestinians. It's like, I talk about the Holocaust industry. Usually it's a little bit more indirect than that. But this is literally 1-to-1. This monument is here to help and assist ideologically the starvation of Palestinians. It's absolutely stunning. And there's no pushback, zero pushback. So when McPherson is saying that CIJA's out of touch, she wouldn't want to go. She's only referring to, far away there. She wouldn't want to get into their position on this kind of stuff. But that's the Holocaust industry. It's pretty remarkable how open they've become on using Nazi crimes to justify Israeli crimes. There's a story in the CBC that I saw today about the high school, Bell High School in Ottawa. The valedictorian, in her speech, long speech, she put some mention, I don't know the exact words, said, so she just mentions Palestinians, big long speech, mentions Palestinians, and then she gets suspended. She gets told, I have proper wording here, that Elizabeth Yao her statement, quote, caused harm and told she shouldn't come to school on Monday. So a valedictorian in high school, I didn't know we actually had those in Canada. I don't remember. I don't feel like I had that in Vancouver. But anyways, I thought that was more of an American thing. But they're going to suspend the valedictorian because she expressed some degree of sympathy for Palestinians amidst this Holocaust, and they're going to say, quote, caused harm. In the vein of this repression in service of Israel's violence, the mayor of Côte Saint Luc, which is about two-thirds Jewish, it's right next to Hampstead, which is about three-quarters Jewish, the municipality of Montreal. But Hampstead is really small; it's like 7,000, 8,000 people. Whereas Côte Saint Luc, I believe, is more like 30 or more thousand. And so it's like the west of Montreal, Anglophone more, and obviously predominantly Jewish. And Brownstein is the mayor of Côte Saint Luc, and he's been pushing. I think Anthony Housefather, he was the mayor of Côte Saint Luc, and then he becomes the Liberal MP in that covers that area. And Brownstein in the Gazette this week has a thing demanding basically more repression. Four concrete measures the city needs to take to address insecurity many Jews feel: banning the wearing of masks at protests, using a policing model that defends the ability of police to make arrests of protesters, of course, establishing 50-meter buffer zones around vulnerable locations, including places of worship, schools, and community centers, and increasing police presence and visibility at these sites. As well, he wants an increased police intervention at protests where placards and signs with such, quote, deeply disturbing and threatening messages such as globalized intifada leave members of our community feeling unsafe and targeted. So he's openly saying we need to have cops arrest people who have placards that say globalized intifada and the bubble zone business and the rest. This is just more of this Zionist fascism that is pushing, authoritarian all over. It's been going on for 20 months. It's had a bunch of success. There's wins and less losses and whatever, but it's a serious authoritarian push that's been going on and continues to go on. In response to the Iran, Israel attacking Iran, the Toronto police later that night, a couple hours after Israel attacks, they put out a statement saying, "We are in contact with our partners as we monitor the situation in the Middle East. We continue to have an increased presence around places of worship and consular offices to ensure community safety." Now, Israel just attacked Iran, but they're not talking about protecting Iranian or Muslim institutions. They're talking about protecting Jewish institutions, and it's all part of like creating the victim narrative. It's all part. I mean, effectively, it's part of the justification of Israeli belligerence and criminality, and we see obviously many examples of this. But it's pretty remarkable to see the police join in on this kind of repressive climate in this way when it's like literally all that had happened is Israel launched acts of aggression. Buzz Hargrove, the former head of the CAW, they reported yesterday that he died. And he was a prominent labor leader. He was a pretty serious anti-Palestinian. He went to Israel with Heather Reisman and Jerry Schwartz, the Hesek Foundation for Lone Soldiers power couple, in 2006. Hargrove attacked CUPE Ontario when they passed their BDS resolution. Hargrove, he wrote a column in the Toronto Star complaining about unions that equate Israel to South Africa. Of course, Israel's far worse than South Africa, but that's not what he meant. He in his biography, he spends a couple of pages attacking Sid Ryan for his Palestine activism. So you see in the online, there's a number of people like the Brian Lilly and other Toronto Sun guy, Laurie Lord Goldstein, I think his name is, and a couple others of Leslie Church, the Liberal MP, that Taub, a conservative, I think it was Harper's speechwriter or something. They've all, I saw posts of them praising Hargrove. I don't think it's just because of because of Hargrove's Zionism, but I think that is a contributing. The fact that all these different Zionists, these like far right Toronto Sun people and stuff, the fact that they praise Hargrove, it's mostly because of Hargrove was a big figure, big player in labor for a long time, and there's different dynamics of that. But I think that part of the reason Hargrove became the personality that he was, and the prominence and stuff like that, and not in a negative sense like like Sid Ryan or the current leader of QP Ontario who stood up for Palestinians. The fact that Hargrove continued to have that certain standing in the corporate media is partly because he went along, and not just went along, but he was, became an advocate against those elements in the labor movement that were criticizing Israel. On the positive, I guess maybe on the march to Gaza, there's, I think, still dozens, maybe still most of the 100 of Canadians in Egypt. It seems like the Egyptian authorities have stymied their ability, been very repressive. They arrested the lead organizer, Manuel, here he's here in Montreal. They arrested him and they seem to have released him. I think they deported him. So obviously the march doesn't seem to have been the success they were hoping for. I think it still was a good endeavor because it did generate quite a bit of attention. It puts pressure on the Egyptians. I mean, I think most people want to put the pressure on Israel, which of course is the main player here in the Holocaust but also the siege and the blockade. But nonetheless, it put some pressure on Egypt, which I think is a positive thing and brought some attention. Media attention, corporate media attention, particularly here in Montreal, to the question of Gaza, which is good. I'm curious to hear what people who are on it think. I've seen some of their comments on Facebook and Twitter and stuff like that, but where they're at more, in a week from now, or when they have a bit more time to sort of reflect on it all. There was a letter signed by over 400 legal scholars, people like Axworthy, Stephen Lewis, maybe not. It was Axworthy. It was his former Canadian UN ambassador. I think it was Axworthy. Rock, not Rock. It's Rock. Anyways, a bunch of these sort of prominent kind of liberal party, liberalish figures that signed this letter. It's got some attention. Criticized. It's an okay letter. It brings up some of the issues that haven't on Canadian support for Israel. The charity stuff it mentions briefly. The prosecution on the Crimes Against Humanity Act is mentioned. So there's some positive in the letter. It's definitely moving the conversation in a good direction. There's a poll that came out this week saying half of Canadians think it's a genocide in Gaza, and it's 60% among 18 to 34-year-olds, is 60%. Liberal supporters, NDP supporters, it's a strong majority, not with the conservatives, but divided with the conservatives. So the public is much more with us than is how it's conveyed in the corporate media. On the note of the corporate media, a breakthrough, Michelle Landsberg, partner of Stephen Lewis, prominent Toronto Star columnist, she had a good piece in the Toronto Star. I think it was in the Sunday paper, I think, maybe it was Saturday. I saw it online. I back the Zionist dream. Now I protest genocide in Gaza. And I've criticized Michelle Landsberg, obviously Avi Lewis's mother. I've criticized her Zionism and her anti-Palestinian positions, but this is a good shift. And she refers to the pushback she got when looking at when starting to criticize the genocide in Gaza, to what Germans would have faced challenging Nazis. So basically saying that in the Jewish community circles that she's in, when she started questioning it, she felt that maybe what it would have been like for a German, questioning, and to do that from somebody who is, identified with Zionism decades, as she goes through in the piece, decades and decades of Zionism, going back to like the 50s. I didn't know that. I didn't know how deeply committed to Zionism she was. I just seen some of her stuff in later years as a columnist, but very committed to Zionism, and now calling herself post-Zionist. So that is a sign of some shift, and I'm sure it makes a lot of this sort of liberal party Toronto older Jewish Zionists very, very uncomfortable that Michelle Landsberg would getting that published in the Toronto Star. Um, there was the counter. So on the positive note too, there was a big demo here in Montreal. I wasn't here. I heard it was as much as my friend said maybe 20,000. Someone else said 10,000. I've heard sort of conflicting numbers. I wasn't there, but it was sizable. So I think that's the biggest Palestine demo for quite a few months. I can't remember what the last one would have hit that number in Montreal. There's been a couple in Ottawa that big, and I think in Toronto maybe, but the Montreal ones, for all kinds of different reasons, there's been lots of them, but they've been declining in size. And this was more of the unions, got a lot of media attention too. It was picked up all over. Uh, um, so that's a positive. I was in Toronto, or I was in Calgary for the Counter Summit, the G7 Summit, and it was the International League of People Struggles that did a People's Forum on the Saturday. And I think they considered it a success with 150 people. Calgary's a tough terrain. It was a long, day-long conference. 150 registered. The demo the next day was probably about 1,000. It was a lot of different issues. It rallied for a couple hours. Probably 600 marched about 2 hours after the rally began. So I think for Calgary, it was viewed as a good mobilization. It was no to the genocidal seven. So there's, the resistance. There is resistance. I think that the march to Gaza, while it may not have been successful in, reaching its objective of actually, breaking the siege, I don't think they thought that was going to happen. But I think it rekindled, the sense that okay, if 100 people are going to fly all over to Egypt and put their bodies on the line and stuff like that, it added to a whole. Uh, Sort of putting it back, putting pressure on people feeling I got to get out in the street, which I think is very, very good. Also, of course, Israel's insanity with regards to Iran is contributes to this. Canada's position. I mean, what we're seeing, I haven't looked in the last couple hours, but Israel earlier today bombed the Iranian state TV. So apparently, the press TV building. I saw some reports saying that there's people like missing still, and you can see this image of the anchor woman, apparently is well-known anchor woman in Iran. She's like, you can hear like some bombing in the background, and she keeps going. I obviously don't speak Farsi, but she keeps going, keeps talking, and then there's like a bombing where you like smoke comes like right into the studio, and then she finally like gets up and walks away because it's like like the office right next door has just been blown up or something. And I mean, Israel is just out of control. This is just a country drunk on its power. Might makes right. Just violence, 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 violence. And to me, what they're doing, obviously they want a regime change as part of their aim. But I think it's a bit more fundamental than that. And like Netanyahu's got his particular reasons. He could say about no, we don't want Iran to get the nuclear weapon. Now, if they don't win here, if Israel doesn't win here, we've just increased the likelihood of Iran getting a nuclear weapon, of course, because now, I mean, how could the Iranian government not try to get a nuclear weapon if they can survive this war? That to me, so Netanyahu has, maybe he wins and therefore, he gets a compliant regime and whatever. But if he doesn't win, Iran's gonna and well, maybe he can set back the nuclear energy program, but I'm skeptical of that. But the bigger picture here is that Zionism wants to destroy, wants to weaken everything around it. That's the fundamental. right? That's what they did in Nasser in 56 and 67. That was the objective. They, Israel, so long as you are a supremacist colonial outpost, that's your neighbors don't like, they may cow to you, they may accommodate to you, but they oppose you so long as you're based upon a supremacist, colonial outpost. That's what Israel is. And so they just want to weaken, and they, that's why they destroyed all of Syria's, when their sort of allies took over 6 months ago in Syria. That's why they took the opportunity to just, destroy all the Syrian military anti-aircraft, their missile defense, whatever, right? Basically destroy all the Israeli or the Syrian military infrastructure. That's why they've just been doing this so they just want to weaken. They want to destroy Sudan. They want to, weaken Iraq. They want to weaken, Libya. That's Israel played less of a role in that. But so this is what Israel wants to do. It's logical that that's what you would want to do, and so that's what they want to do with Iran. So do they? They want to overthrow the government. If they can't overthrow the government, they want to weaken the country. And yes, destroying its nuclear energy program is good for that, because a nuclear energy program is part of, part of the strength of a country, right? So that to me is what Israel's doing. Yeah, Netanyahu's got some specific motivations. There's other factors that enter into these things, but that's the kind of fundamental issue, and I don't feel like enough people are framing it in that light. But the Canadian government's reaction, right? They after Iran responds, they don't say anything about Israel's attacks. After Iran responds, Carney puts out a statement about criticizing Iran's attacks, saying Israel has a right to defend itself. Then you have Anita Anand with her Israeli counterpart having a phone conversation, and then she tweets out, Canada firmly supports Israel's right to defend itself in the face of Iranian attacks. And then talks about, I guess there's some Canadian embassy staff member that their building was hit or something, somehow affected, and talk about the brave Israeli firefighters that helped the Canadian embassy staff member. The embassy staff member is probably Israeli, probably just, like a clerk or whatever that's not actually, not even a Canadian. I think they would have said it was Canadian if it was a Canadian, they probably would have said that. And so they're just defending, so one more time, Israel launches an act of aggression, and we come to Israel's defense. We declare their right to defense. We blame the country. And Canada has played such an important role in isolating Iran, emboldening Iran or emboldening Israel to attack Iran. No diplomatic relations. Listing as a state sponsor of terror. Listing the IRGC as a terrorist organization. Constant demonization, the whole business about the flight 752, 5 years ago, that was blown up. Just like now, it was blown up. Nothing to do with the fact the Americans, assassinated General Soleimani in Iraq. That's the background to this. It was an error. It was clearly bad error that Iranian military officials, blowing the plane up. No doubt about it. The families deserve compensation. This is a terrible tragedy. It speaks to incompetence, whatever. But the fundamental issue, politically speaking, it's the US that instigated this. That's been completely wiped out of the discussion, and it's just demonized Iran. And we have like National Air Victims Day, where the Premier of BC, the NDP Premier, basically uses it just as a day to attack Iran. So we've played a really important role in isolating Iran, and this goes back at least 13 years with the decisions of Harper, Iranian assets seized in Canada, on and on and on. And so that's an important part of this picture. The other thing on this, and I think I'll just end on this because I've gone on too long. Immediately all the Jewish pro-Israel groups, the night of, this begins on, it was late Thursday night, the news started breaking. And within like hours, all these pro-Israel Jewish organizations, CJA, B'nai B'rith, the Federation, the Vancouver Federation, the Toronto Federation, they all like pray for Israel. So Israel's just launched an act of aggression, and they're all setting up for pray for Israel. It's like Israel's the victim. Totally remarkable kind of dynamic. And I don't think I think they kill. I think Israel could kill everyone in the region, and these Jewish Zionist organizations in Canada would stand by Israel, and they would. I literally believe that they could kill, maybe not every single person, but 150 million people, and these Jewish Zionist organizations in Canada would continue to quote unquote pray for Israel. It's pretty remarkable to witness. I think I'll leave it at that. And if anyone's got questions, go ahead, and I'll make Laura a co-host. I think maybe I'll just I see Hans, so I'll just let you go, Hans, and then I'll make Laura.
Okay, I'm unmuted, I believe.
Yeah.
Um, the interview that struck me the most at the beginning of this war was Dmitry interviewing Life Malouf from freepalestine.video. The gist of what he was saying, we've just transitioned from Cold War II into World War III, although I'm putting words in his mouth. He sees this war as more than the initial salvo of spectacular airstrikes with obvious Israeli air superiority. He sees this as a 5-year war. And while he's disappointed with China, and Dmitry understandably points out that Russia is got its hands full in Ukraine. Again, the Iranians are not getting the ultimate sophisticated weapons that Russia has in its arsenal for air defense, according to Life Malouf. So we're obviously in all-out mobilization mode because this is another notch of Israeli Hitlerism, pardon me for using that word, striking while the iron's hot. But I don't think they're going to succeed necessarily, although they're trying very hard to draw the Americans into this war. I think Iran is probably going to refrain from bombing initially the U.S. bases on the Gulf. I loved your article this morning about Chrétien outflanking the NDP. With the leadership race coming up in the NDP, we in the left have an opportunity, I believe, to make this warmongering a wedge issue in the leadership campaign. Not that I'm saying we're going to win the leadership, but I think it provides the left with a spectacular opportunity now that the what do you want to call them? The party elders, including most recently Stephen Lewis, and you referred Michelle Landsberg, the Lewis clan, have taken an anti-Zionist stand. I want to comment on Charlie Angus. I've joined his grandmother uh, demonstrating at Bay and Bloor every Wednesday at 8 o'clock. Never normalized genocide is the banner she has printed up in many copies, and the numbers of people are growing. Obviously, Angus is burning his bridges with the party establishment, but since historically he lives in a post-World War souvenir memory, the heroism, the sacrifices made by Canadian working people in the war loom largely in his commitment still to NATO. And probably why he will not run, is my gut feeling. I don't have any reason, but I do respect the fact that he calls Trump and Putin gangsters. Um, but unfortunately, he's on the wrong side of the Ukraine issue. Um, but nevertheless, I think, and this is my question to you. I think you would agree that this is really one of the chief opportunities for the left to try to break the NDP away from this militarized boondoggle, the warmongering, and the ridiculous expenditures that it's involving. At the last mass rally here, I think it was Wednesday night, I carried my little banner that says, "Fight GHG, not World War III." Well, I thought it was pertinent. And at the end of the parade, somebody asked me, "What does GHG mean?" And she suggested it meant um, fight global hegemonic gangsters. And with that, of course, we mean primarily Trump. So that's my two bits worth. I would like you to comment on the leadership race coming up in the NDP, please.
Yeah, well, first thing, I mean, the cynic in me thinks that Michelle Landsberg and Stephen Lewis coming out on Palestine in the last few weeks is because Avi Lewis is setting up to run. I would be surprised if that's not a contributor in their very kind of public kind of push on that. I don't know, but anyway, so that'd be a cynic of me. I think Avi Lewis is probably going to run. Who would which would be better than I've heard Heather McPherson might run, and I've heard Leah Gazan are the people being names thrown around. Um, Avi would be better than certainly better than the Jagmeet Singh outlook. Heather McPherson would be very much the establishment. I don't know if Leah. I don't know enough about Leah. I would guess that to me it would be kind of a toss up between Leah and Avi in terms of where their politics would fall. But yeah, I mean, I think the militarism is really important. The Palestine stuff, like they don't go far enough, and but things have kind of started to solidify within the NDP world on that issue. Now it's kind of like there's basically a consensus, how far they're willing to go, whatever, but there's a basic consensus. The militarism, I mean, they're still like NATO hawks, like NATO hawks. And that NATO hawkishness is coming up against cuts to all the public sector unions, coming up against attack. I mean, that's coming. That there's no scenario that there's no end. I mean, you can put a bunch more money into the military and tax wealthy people. That could be one way of doing it, right? That's not what's going to happen, though. We know that Mark Carney is not going to do that, right? He's going to cut on social programs, and there's already setting that up. So the NDP is going to be put, faced with this dilemma where they want to defend the social programs, they want to kind of push back against military spending, but they're totally bought into NATO. That's a big problem. And so not just NATO, it's bought into the China. They're bought into basically, with the exception of Palestine, they're bought into even, I should have said that about Iran. I totally forgot about that. The NDP statement, Heather McPherson's statement on Iran was okay. It was okay. And I think we got that action alert out. That CFPI and Just Peace Advocates got an action alert early the next morning. And it's up to, I think, like 6,000 people now. But within a couple hours, a couple thousand people had emailed. We CC'd the NDP on that. So it was going to Carney and Davies. And I think that's part of why the NDP statement was part of it's because it shifted on Israel and Palestine. And then I think that quick push there led to probably about as good as we could have expected, considering how anti-Iran Heather McPherson has been. So anyways, she's basically on board with, the Western Empire, with the exception of Palestine, on board with, China's a big threat, Russia's a big threat. That all is used to justify military spending. So yes, I think there's total dynamic there that's going to become an increasingly um, intense battle. And obviously, the fact that they only have seven MPs, when you're so far from power, you should be getting closer to saying what's right and saying, standing up for your principles, right? You're not on the cusp of power. So the being down at seven MPs should lead to a sort of leftward shift with the party. But yeah, we'll see what happens with the leadership race and where things go with that and the opportunities to push the party to the left on that and stuff.
Okay, John, go ahead.
Thanks very much. Hey, first off, what you said about where do you draw the line on how much NATO spending is worthwhile, that's a line worth exploring and pushing on. But on the Iran Zionism thing, I think we need to be careful. The enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of thinking. To be clear, Iran is no friend of socialism, no friend of the working class, no friend of any of the aspirations that I think the people on this call support. So, yes, I mean, aggression by Israel or by Iran, one against the other, should be opposed, but neither should be supported as a regime worth supporting, because that's just not true. And I think we don't want to, because we're so used to opposing Zionism, fall into a trap of somehow backing into some sort of support for the Islamic Republic of Iran, who's not friendly to our view. Just
Yeah, my sense on that, I mean, I've said this a few times that, like, I think for like Iranian Canadians, like the position, to me, the coherent position is that if someone's like wants to call for the overthrow of the government of Iran and wants a different different regime, it's totally coherent to say that's what I want, but Canada should have restart diplomatic relations. We shouldn't have it listed as a state sponsor of terror. I mean, if you're not going to have Israel listed as a state sponsor of terror, how in the world could you have Iran listed? So I've said that a bunch of times. If Iranian Canadians want to call for the overthrow of the government and they think it's a terrible, it's repressive or it's anti-feminist or it's terrible ecological, So now, having said that, I do more or less. I don't know, that much about Iranian internal politics. I think there is a socialistic element. I think there's a big success in terms of education and stuff like that that's come over the past, certainly since the Shah. So there is an investment in the public that is tied to the nationalism of the Iranian Revolution and repressive. But when it comes to their sort of geopolitical position, I have a lot of sympathy for the Iranian government, right? I think that they're to the extent they've assisted Palestinians, Hezbollah, I have a fair bit of sympathy for it. So that's not I mean, I'm not Iranian, so I don't really like have a right one way or another of saying, is this the right government or the wrong government or whatever. So I totally agree with you that it's certainly not a socialist government. It's I think very clearly repressive. But when you look at the nature of the region, like I don't have much sympathy for a sort of like liberal minded kind of look at this stuff anymore, right? Like Israel is there is no scenario. You can't be like liberal. I mean, Israel is not going to allow that. So I don't think the alternative in Iran is not like economic democracy and socialism. That's not a plausible alternative. That would be destroyed. That would be any sort of liberal. Even you look at how much Israel's infiltrated Iran, even with the fairly like repressive kind of politics. So if you were to have, the freedoms that we consider more like, the liberal order, there's just no. So I don't know what that leads us to, but I don't take a real position. Well, I don't think it's particularly important to take a position one way or another on, do we defend the government, or is it the right government, or is it a good government, or whatever. I think what we need to do is be like, well, Israel is completely in the wrong here. Uh, Iran, Canada is in the wrong by having such a flagrantly double standard. If the IRGC is on the terrorist list, and the IOF is not, how is that? And the American military is not. If
Yeah.
Iran's, so that's the stuff we need to talk about. The Canada has done all this stuff towards the Iranian government, not because there was, incompetent officials that shot down an airplane. They're doing it because they want to set up the stage where the US and Israel can destroy the country and the government. The government, first of all, and the country secondarily, right? So I don't know. Like what yes, is it a pro working class government? Not really. That's not my impression. My understanding is quite bad ecologically. And I don't support mandatory veil. Right? I mean, so I don't know.
Okay, go ahead, Hans.
On that topic, the immediate response is that this Israeli attack is a naked violation of aggression of the UN Charter. And all those people that have been frothing at the mouth about Putin's special operation should swallow hard, because they're not saying a peep about a similar violation of the Charter by the Zionists. The dementi by the Iranians that they are trying to obtain a nuclear weapon has stood the test of time, but will now go by the wayside, because I think the Iranians, certainly the population, according to Laif Malouf, the population of Iran realizes that they have to do the North Korean route to get immunity. But as I said, the blatant double standard when you compare the attack on Iran with the so-called attack on Ukraine, that is, I think, the most flagrant hypocrisy in our government. Thank you. Sorry to speak twice.
Can I just ask you something? Because I don't think there are any other questions. Eve, I was just wondering, where is Canada now in terms of supplying parts for, I don't know, the F-35 or anything? Are they still supplying those things via the US?
Yeah, there's I don't know of any indication that they've any shift in that, and probably it's the more Israel uses their fighter jets, the more need there is for spare parts and stuff. So my guess is that's all continuing. And also, I should have said, I didn't get into this. Canadian forces are almost certainly involved in assisting the Israelis, because the U.S. is involved in assisting. And we know there's like about 18, according to, it's called Operation Foundation. I was looking into it and just write a story about this. There's 18 Canadian soldiers that are deployed as part of Operation Foundation, a couple in Qatar, Bahrain, Jordan, a couple in Tampa, Florida, part of the U.S. CENTCOM's focus on the region. And the U.S. is providing the refueling, intelligence. My guess, NORAD, of course, is also almost certainly involved in this, and Canada's got hundreds of forces with NORAD. So there'll be almost for sure there's at least into the handfuls, if not dozens, of Canadian forces that have assisted directly Israel in these operations. That would be my guess. I can't prove that, but that would be my guess. And there are some calls for Canada to, obviously big calls in the States, and that I think maybe might happen. But there are some calls for Canada to, assist directly, militarily, openly, militarily, So I'm curious to see a bit where that question goes, but.
Maybe they'll do what they did during Iraq when they went after Iraq and Canada pretended that it wasn't joining it, and then it bragged openly about providing the third most highest level of support to the Americans in that of all countries. I don't know if you heard this. I just wanted to get your reaction. That very famous, I can't remember, he's an Indian diplomat who's very famous now as a commentator. He had something on X today where he was saying he couldn't verify it, but he had read report that India was allowing and was assisting Israel, and the F-35s or something were coming into India for refueling or something. I can't remember what it was exactly. And I thought, wow, India against Iran, it's BRICS partner, so no hope for anything from any, the BRICS in that sense.
Yeah, I haven't heard that. That would sort of surprise me. I know that in India there was the Shanghai Cooperation Council, which is China, Russia, a bunch of the stands, maybe 10 countries. They put out a statement criticizing Israel, and India officially sort of like distanced itself from the statement. So India is clearly, Modi's got fairly close ties with Netanyahu. I don't think they're like publicly backing Israel's actions, but yeah, I would be a little surprised if that's true, but who knows?
Okay, so John has come back with a question, and then we'll take that, and then we'll go. Go ahead, John.
Just my final comment is this: the current alignment of forces reminds me in some ways of pre-World War I with Russia and Iran and that capitalist alliance against the imperialist U.S.-led alliance. And I would just say a pox on both their houses. The approach for us is to oppose aggression everywhere and support working class movements everywhere as well, inside Israel or inside Iran. And that's a tough road to hoe.
Yeah, I think that my grasp of the history of pre-World War I is not strong enough to say this with a high level of confidence, but I see like Iran is not the aggressor. Iran is decidedly responding to the aggressiveness of Israel. Israel is clear. That dynamic in the case of Ukraine gets a bit more complicated, where I do see NATO as the geopolitical aggressor, but Russia as the military aggressor. So big picture, it is NATO that's the Russia sort of responding to that aggressive posture, but clearly vis-a-vis Ukraine, Russia is the aggressor in the narrow sense there. So. But yeah, I see that as a different. It was more equal in the lead up to World War I than it is in this context, where I do agree that we potentially are in a scenario where we are going towards global, World War III or whatever you want to call it. But I think Iran definitely wants to end the fighting right away. China doesn't want war. That's a more complicated question in terms of Russia's culpability in all this. In at least in their sphere of with regards to Ukraine. Yeah. So.
Okay, I think we can let you go, Eve. Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, everyone.
Bye.